Good evening, everyone. We want to thank you for attending our webinar tonight, Lesson Planning for a Mixed Age Group. Also, for agreeing to join us for an hour and a half. And we hope all of you can stay for the hour and a half because we have a lot to cover. I'm going to review just about the audio, but the problem is if maybe you're not hooked up right, you may not be able to hear me, but you do need to be able to check under your audio tab whether you're using your phone or your computer. The phone is really good for listening, but if you need to use your computer, you just need to make sure under the audio tab that you select one or the other. You also notice that you've got 3 handouts. Hopefully some of you got them downloaded before we got started. If you didn't, that's okay. They will be on our website after the webinar is over with. And these handouts are what that's going to be using tonight for the presentation. And I did try to send you, everybody should have gotten a follow-up email about 3 hours ago with one of the handouts that maybe you've had a chance to download that one and possibly print it. Beth Smith is our presenter tonight. And she will be asking for a lot of input from all of you tonight. And you will not be able to see the input, but we'll read them to you as much as we can. But we've got a lot of folks on the webinar tonight, so we may not get to all of them. And I'm sorry that you can't see what everybody else is writing, but we'll try to share as much as we can given the time constraints that we have. With that said, just know that we are recording this webinar. We will get it posted sometime tomorrow. Usually it takes just a little bit of time to get it up and going and posted, and it will be on our website tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Beth and let her get started because we do have a lot to cover. Beth?
Good. All right. Hey, thanks, Sherry. Good evening, everyone. And again, thanks so much for taking time to join us for this webinar. We hope, my goal is that you walk away from here with ideas that you can put into place tomorrow. As Sherry said, this is an interactive webinar. It's a little challenging because tonight's group is very large. So when I ask you to share, like Sherry said, if we don't get to your suggestion, please don't feel like it's just because we're leaving it out. It's just they all pop up in a screen and Sherry has to scroll through them as fast as she can.
Hey, Beth.
Yes.
Beth, one quick thing I forgot to tell. Can you tell them where to share their comments? I
You
forgot
can go
to
ahead
go
and
over
share it. Go
that.
ahead.
Well, just under your little question box in the top right-hand corner, you'll see where questions are. That's where you'll type in your responses and then just hit send. So just to let you know that. Thanks.
So anyway, yes, it's going to be very interactive. There'll be times when I'm going to pause throughout the evening to let you share your ideas. We've done a lot of webinars here at GWiz, and we really strongly believe that that's very important, that we learn from each other, and that we want to hear what you have to say. So this will not be 1 hour and a half of me just blabbing on and on and on. A, I would probably lose my voice, and B, you would probably fall asleep. So with that said, tonight's webinar is lesson planning for a mixed age group, and I know we have a lot of family child care providers on the webinar tonight. We have some that work in centers. A lot of what we're going to talk about will be applicable regardless of the age group that you're working with, but the focus will be on those of you that have a mixed age group. We maybe shouldn't share some of this because these are like our trade secrets, because at GWiz this is what we do, but we want you to benefit from the knowledge that we have on how you can do many different things and accomplish many different goals as you're looking at lesson planning. So with that said, let me see if I can get my screen to go on to the next page. All right, so what will you learn? Just like you have goals for the children every day, we have goals for you. And this is the goals of my webinar that I've planned out for you today these are our goals. What does developmental level even mean? Why is it important to keep developmental levels in mind when you're planning? How can you adapt experiences for children at different developmental levels, which those of you with a mixed age group certainly have, and even those that of you may work in like a 3-year-old classroom, you're going to have many different developmental levels. What are the 10 developmental areas you must keep in mind when lesson planning? Are there safety concerns? Obviously, for instance, if you have children under the age of 3, there are choking concerns, and you may even have safety concerns with older children depending on where they are developmentally. And why is it important to engage with children during experiences? We do a whole webinar about this, but we're going to talk about this in conjunction with what all the other topics we're going to go over this evening. So, as Sherry mentioned, there is a question box, and we're going to start out with a question. So, the question is, what is meant when we say developmental level? In other words, what does it mean when you are talking about a child's developmental level? So, go up to the question box and type in your answer. Sherry will unmute herself, and she's going to read off some of your responses.
Okay, we got a couple of people still trying to get their screens up, and so I'm trying to respond as quickly as I can for you. Okay, the age where they are developmentally, and I'm not sure that person, they probably hit send before they finished the response. Their learning level for age. Let's see, not all children develop at the same time or at the same rate. And a child's ability. Um, where the child should be according to their age. And Beth, I apologize. I was so busy responding. I'm not sure what question you ask everyone.
What is meant when we say developmental
Oh,
level?
okay, okay.
All right. Well, those
Uh,
are some
okay,
great
great.
responses, and we're going to keep on moving, especially since Sherry needs answers and questions in the background. So let's move on. Developmental level is where a child is on a developmental progression of skills in a particular area. So sometimes that's referred to as a developmental milestone or a developmental stage. It is most often very different for different children and different developmental levels in someone or different developmental areas, and someone just mentioned that. I want you to take just a second and think about the children in your group right now. Don't think about their chronological age. In other words, are they 2? Are they 3? Are they 4? Think about fine motor skills, okay? And if you were to put out scissors and paper, which of your children would be able to pick up the scissors and cut with some, with some ability? Which of your children would not even know how to hold the scissors in their hands? And which of them would look at the scissors and go, "What are those?" That's what is meant by a developmental level, right? So you may have two children who are both 3 years old. You may have one child on the level of they can pick those scissors up and they can cut with them. You may have another child who's 3 years old who can pick the scissors up, but they don't quite know how they work yet. And that's normal and that's perfectly okay. The point being that as an educator, when you're working with children, you're planning experiences, it's very, very important to know who's where. And we're going to talk quite a bit about what that means in terms of when you're planning. So how do you take that knowledge and what do you do when you're planning experiences and how do you integrate that in there? But it's really important to know what we mean when we say developmental level. Okay? All right, great. So why do you think knowing each child's developmental level is important? I gave you some reasons on the last slide, but in your own personal experience, why do you think it's very important for you to know where each child in your care is developmentally, not by their age, whether they're 3, 4, or 5, but where they are developmentally? And if you would like to type that idea in the box, then Sherry will unmute herself and share what you have to say.
Okay. So you can plan for their learning, for lesson planning, goal setting, and knowing what to teach and when to and where the focus, what the focus
Mhm,
on.
mhm, yep.
To alert to red flags or to be alerted to red flags. So you can plan their learning. Oh man, they're coming in now.
Good.
Developmental level is important to consider so that learning experiences are meaningful and appropriate. Very good response.
Mhm.
That gives us the ability to see what areas we need to practice with our children and setting goals. So you will know how to plan your lesson plans.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to have tasks that they can be successful at, so you can meet their needs and build upon them.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Um, to understand them at their level and plan accordingly. I'm trying to make sure I get different varieties of the responses. You need to know what skills, materials, and activities you need to plan for the whole group. Plan, do, and act, and grow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay.
I
Good.
think everybody put their thinking caps on this evening. Excellent. Very good. All right, perfect. We're going to keep on moving. All right, so there are different ways, as you all know very well, that you can gather information about each child's developmental level. Some of those are formal and some of those are informal. Informal would be things like observing. The children are engaged in free play, and you are sitting watching from a distance, or maybe you're engaging with them, but the real point is you're observing what's going on. Maybe you're watching the children in the block center, and you are watching how they're handling the blocks. Are they able to stack blocks, or do they arrange them side by side? How do they manipulate the blocks? Those types of things, especially outside when they're engaging in large motor. Are they able to climb the steps of the slide? Are they able to kick a ball yet? Can they pedal a tricycle? All those things you can just observe to learn where they are developmentally on those skills. Then as you're doing those observations, you can record anecdotal notes and do reflections on those. We have an entire section on our website dedicated to this. I can show you where that is when we go to the website, but an anecdotal note is like a written video is how I refer to it. So in other words, when you do a video does not have any personal biases or ideas or thoughts or I think this is happening. A video is straight facts, right? Just the facts, ma'am, as I used to say on all the police shows, just the facts. So that's what an anecdotal note is. It's exactly what's happening. It's what you're seeing, it's what you're hearing. And then when you get ready to do the reflection, you sit back and you think about, okay, I just observed X, Y, and Z. What does that tell me about the child? What does it tell me about where they are developmentally? What does it tell me about their skills in different areas? Again, photos and videos can be a big part of that, especially if you're doing a digital portfolio for each child, where you take photos of them when they're engaged, where you take video and you actually input it into a portfolio. And then, of course, there are formal assessments. From our experience, we know that a lot of providers use ages and stages and teaching strategies gold. Those of you out in California, the DRDP is a big one. These are more formal tools that you use to figure out where a child is on a developmental continuum, where they are, where they're going. So we know that providers use many different kinds of assessment when figuring out where each child's developmental level is. But probably the biggest one, to be honest, is just what you know because you're engaging with the children on a daily basis. Um, you are with them for especially those of you who are family child care providers. That's the beauty of family child care. You may have a child from the time they're a baby until they're well into school. And so you've seen that developmental continuum for that particular child. And I've always said, even when I was, teaching school, public school, that if you're a good teacher, you don't really need all these formal assessments because anybody should be able to walk into your class and say, where is this child on, in reading or math or science or whatnot, and you should be able to tell them because if you know your students well enough, you should know that. And I think as family child care providers, you have a huge benefit there in that you are with that child from the time they're little. It's not like when you're a second grade teacher and all of a sudden these children come from first grade and you know nothing about them. When you're a family child care provider, you've had them, and so you get to see them grow up, right? You get to see them develop. So that's a huge benefit of being a family child care provider. So when we talk about developmental levels, so now we know why that's important to know about each child so that we're planning experiences that are developmentally appropriate, that are challenging but not too challenging or too easy. But we also need to think about when we're doing lesson plans, the 10 developmental areas. Now, in different states, there may be more or less than 10, but in my experience, having looked at an awful lot of them, they basically all say the same. So What are the 10 developmental areas and why do you think they're important? Now, Sherry will go absolutely crazy if you type all 10 developmental areas and why they're important in your text box because she'll be like, oh my gosh, I cannot read all of these things. So just name one of the 10 developmental areas and then you can share why you think that area is important. I'll give you an example. Um, Science knowledge is one of the 10 developmental areas, and you could explain why science knowledge is important. So you could put in your text in your question box, science knowledge is important because X, Y, and Z. And then Sherry's going to read off some of those, but let's see if we can hit on all 10. There are 10 of them, and well, at least in GWiz, when we do our lesson planning, we keep 10 in mind based on um, a lot of the state and national standards combined. So share your thoughts, and Sherry will share them with the group.
Okay, there is a question on the table that what age range is this webinar geared for? And I think Beth's leading up to that because it is for a mixed age group.
And
And
I
you
would
can,
say infant through, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about school age and after school, but that's mainly going to be school age and after school, as in, maybe you have them all day right now because of COVID, but normally you might have them just before or after school.
okay, so we're getting a lot of the developmental areas listed, but not why it's important necessarily. So we've got physical, social, emotional, cognitive. Um, well, we do have language. So, oh, here we go. Social, emotional, because that is how they can connect with people, family, and caregivers.
Excellent.
Yeah. Approaches to learning allows them to explore.
Hmm.
Great. Language is important because it's involved in almost every other area.
Absolutely.
Um, Social, emotional, we want to help children become well-adjusted adults.
Absolutely.
Uh, Language development is important so that children can learn to communicate effectively. Okay. Speech is important because a child needs to know how to use words to express their emotions. We've got a lot of language, a lot of social and emotional.
Hmm.
And we had the one approach to learning, physical, but we didn't have what they said was why. More coming in. Moral
Okay.
development, which I'm pretty sure they were talking about character development, learning
Hmm.
right from wrong. Language communication, so they can communicate with others. So we're really hot on language and social and emotional, which is great.
Yep.
I'm
Well,
looking
and I
for
think
something
those are
different.
two areas that are in everything, right? Social and emotional and language, or someone said it is, there are areas that are on almost everything you do.
Physical and working on growth as well as fine motor skill. Oh, music
Mm.
and creative arts to express our creative side.
Excellent.
Uh, and somebody just asked if we're recording, and yes, we are. Math, reasoning, and problem solving.
Excellent.
Okay. And just if those of you that are listening that came in late, you cannot see what everybody else is typing. That's come up several times. People have asked about that. And I'm sorry. That's why I'm trying to read it to you as quickly as I can. Um, Gross motor for moving and walking. Science is important. Oh, because they know about environment, where they are in space, and the focus at work on Earth.
Excellent.
Okay.
Science is very important. One more, Sherry, and
Okay.
then I'm going to move to the
Okay.
next slide.
All right. Science and biology so that they can learn the world around us.
Excellent.
And
All right, perfect. Everybody's doing a great job sharing. I really, really appreciate that. All right, so the 10 developmental areas are right here on this slide. I'm not going to read them all to you, but you'll notice these little picture codes, and I'll tell you why they're there, and we're going to come back to this. This is something that we do at GWiz to make things easier to connect actual experiences to developmental areas, because when you're doing your lesson plans, if you have to write out the developmental areas, it can take up a lot of space and a lot of time. So we use these picture codes. Um, a lot of language development obviously was mentioned, which is absolutely true when someone said it's in pretty much everything you do because you're speaking, you're listening, you're communicating, obviously. Literacy knowledge, I'm not sure if anybody mentioned this, but literacy knowledge is anything related to books, Handling books, we read from left to right, but also letters, letter sounds, words, sentences, and beginning writing. Why is that important? Obviously, it's a tool for communication with others. Math knowledge, that would cover everything from counting to numerals to patterning and making sets, comparing, contrasting, estimation, measurement. Why is that important? Because we use it every day in our lives. We just did a webinar 2 weeks ago about math, is making math meaningful, and how we are really using math all the time when we may not even realize it. Science knowledge is, as somebody said, about biology and space and environment. Those are topics within science, but science is also about using your senses to learn. It's about predicting and making predictions and testing predictions, and about learning about the natural world and as someone said, space and biology and chemistry and all those aspects of science. Logic and reasoning is problem solving, which again comes into play in almost everything that children do. They're problem solving constantly. And then also using something in a way that's not the normal way. And you've all seen children do this. They pick up a block and it becomes a cell phone, or they pick up a big cooking spoon and it becomes a microphone. That's part of logic and reasoning. Social studies knowledge is about their families, about their community, about the environment, and also about history. And that also comes into play every day. I mean, our families are all unique and special, and that can be interwoven into the experiences you plan when you encourage children to share about their own families. Social emotional development, everybody mentioned that. And again, it's interwoven because you're talking about building relationships with each other, you're talking about self-regulation, you're talking about different feelings, all of that falls under social and emotional. Music and creative arts is really important. Creative arts is not just fine art, as in painting, drawing, and that type of art, but also movement can be included in creative arts and dramatic play. Physical development and health, people mentioned gross and fine motor skills, obviously, but we also have in physical development and health safety and taking care of ourselves. Our self-help skills can fall under there. Um, all of those types of things fall under physical development and health. And then approaches to learning, trying new things, persistence, patience, cooperation, all of those fall under approaches to learning. So these 10 developmental areas are going to become very important as we talk about lesson planning. And why is that? Because you want to balance and you want to make sure you touch on all these different developmental areas when you're doing your lesson plans. Initially, that may seem impossible, right? I can't possibly plan an activity for each of these areas every day. It's not what you're going to do. When we talk about lesson planning, our goal is actually to encompass as many of these areas in one activity as we can. And we're going to practice that right now. So here's an experience that we took from our curriculum called packing and shipping. And the age range for this is toddlers to 4. That does not necessarily mean that if you had some school-age children, they might not enjoy this activity. It's just that's who we planned it for. So you'll see the list up here of the areas. So we have language development, we have approaches to learning, we have social and emotional, creative arts, literacy, science, and physical development and health. So in one experience, we will have covered 7 of the developmental areas. Okay, so when you talk about lesson planning and when you're planning your activities that you're going to do with children, what you want to think about is what developmental areas am I going to be able to address? What developmental areas am I going to be able to observe when I plan this experience? So it's, much more than simply, okay, what are we going to do today? There's thought that goes into this and a lot of thought. So in this experience, for instance, where you're going to sit out assorted boxes, different kinds of tape, tissue paper, scissors. This actually comes from the teaching guide that you have given to you during this webinar as a handout, which was blankets, boxes, and bowls, or bowls, blankets, and boxes. I can't remember which way it went, but anyway, it came from that actual unit. So if you download that teaching guide that we have given you as a handout, then you will have this experience in there. So what we've done is we've leveled it for different developmental different developmental levels. So when you see toddlers, twos, and young threes, you might have a child who's 4, but they fall better under this adaptation of the experience. Vice versa, you might have a child who's a young 3 who really would do better with the older 3 for advanced preschooler option. You can read those right now, and we're going to practice leveling experiences. But basically, what you're doing when you're doing that is you're thinking about each child in your group. So let's say you decide to do packing and shipping as your activity. You've thought through the developmental areas you're going to address. Now you have to think about the children in your group and how they will handle this experience or how they will approach this experience and which way will work best for them. And it might be that there might be a different way that you need to set up the materials given the children in your group and their special needs. That could be a strong possibility. So in this experience, they're just going to pretend. They're going to pack and address boxes and pretend they're packing and shipping them. So they're engaging in dramatic play. So because some of you out there right now, due to COVID, have school-age children all day, let's talk about them for a second because we haven't given you an adaptation for that. Think about if you do have some children who are school agers or after schoolers right now, how could you adapt this experience for them to make it even more challenging than what we have as the option for the older 3s, 4s, and advanced preschoolers so they can engage in this experience too? Because the goal for family child care providers in doing this is that you can do one experience, but you can just adapt that one experience for different developmental levels. So think about your school-aged children that you may have or have had in the past, and how could you do this experience with them? What additional materials could you add? What approach could you take? And share your ideas in the question box.
A question came in as you were talking, Beth, and explaining how to adapt, which I think is pretty appropriate. And is I have children that are special needs. If I see that a child is gifted, how do I address this with the parent and create lesson plans for them? I think you really covered how to do the lesson plans, and that's what we're doing now. Um, but how you address it with the parents would be the question on the table, I see.
I think when you talk about giftedness, in my experience with children, is you will find that there is one. I always told when I was teaching kindergarten. Let me regress 1 second. Um, I've always told parents that every child is gifted in something, and you might not find out what that gift is until down the road. And that was really important for parents to hear, especially if their child was maybe struggling with, the adjustment to kindergarten, which is a big adjustment. And I do believe it is true. I have 2 very different children myself. I have one that is extremely gifted in writing and verbal, and she's just like, I swear she's going to be down the road a judge, but anyway, or an attorney. But my son is very gifted athletically. He could pick up any ball and pick up that sport lickety split. He's also a very people oriented person. He's studying exercise science. So I think every child is gifted. So I think when you approach it with the parents, it's important for you to figure out what areas you feel like they are really excelling at, and then have a conversation with them about whether or not they see that at home, and then work together to come up with some ideas on how that you can enhance that area in your program, and also they can continue to do that at home because they're with their parents more than they're with you. And it's really important for them to know how they can continue to reinforce what you're doing in the program. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, I hope we've got some pretty good responses. Let them actually send a back to the question. Let them actually send a package to themselves or to someone else. They could help the younger kids with writing addresses, and they could actually ship a package to themselves or to
Oh,
someone else.
that would be
Um,
fun.
Add a scale to weigh the packages. That's a very good
That's a great
suggestion.
idea.
Um, my school-age children always feel like that they need to be the foreman of the group. That's so true. Pack boxes for military officers, and then send them with the letter.
That's a great
Uh,
idea.
okay. For school age, set up a post office area, cash register, money, clock, posting hours, and etc.
That's a great idea. And they would love that too.
Older children can write a list um, for items to be shipped. See, school-age children can pack and ship supplies to people in need.
Hmm.
Uh, see, for school-age children, they could possibly write their address and mail it to others, or mail the packages to others.
Hmm.
Wrap the boxes for gifts.
That is a challenging activity. I'm not sure my husband ever mastered that skill. He hates wrapping presents.
Oh, so that's what we got.
Excellent, excellent. The point being there, and I think you heard it in the experiences that people were suggesting, was think about, for instance, the idea about playing post office and all the different areas of development you could address during that one experience. I mean, obviously they'd engage in dramatic play, but if they're weighing packages like someone mentioned, then it's math. If they have to read a table, and I know, for instance, if you wanted to incorporate some technology, the USPS has a place on their website where you can put in someone's zip code and how much a package weighs, and it will calculate the weight and how much it will cost. So you could actually incorporate technology in there as well in a meaningful way, and how it's used when you're talking about packing and shipping. So the point being that, as you can see from this one simple experience, when you're planning, that's what you need to keep in mind. It's not just what you're going to do, what materials you need. It's, what's going to happen and what areas are you going to address and how are you going to adapt it for different developmental levels. Excellent. Which brings me to lesson planning for mixed age groups. Big question. For those of you who are family child care providers that have multiple ages in your group, why is lesson planning for a mixed age group so challenging?
Beth?
Yes.
Okay, all of a sudden I could not hear you. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Okay,
I'm
go
waiting
ahead.
for them to type in their answers about why writing lesson plans for a mixed age group is so challenging.
Okay. There was one response from the last question that is really good. I have an assembly line of pack and post with your older children.
Oh, that would be
Okay.
fun.
Um, there's just not enough time in the day. Different interest, making sure we are meeting everyone's developmental levels. Um,
That is challenging. Very challenging.
um, choking hazards versus bored or unchallenged because they are all on so many different levels. Some materials that older children can use aren't appropriate for small children. You have to be very much aware of that. That's a very good suggestion.
Absolutely.
Because unless you know the child, their interests, and then they might not care what your plan is all about.
That is
Making
very true.
making everything meaningful to all of us, to all of the developmental levels for all the children. Everyone is not on the same level, and you want to make sure you accommodate everyone
Absolutely.
because you have to meet the needs of all the kids, and sometimes that can be very difficult. It's let's see, every child is on different developmental levels, and you would have to implement developmentally appropriate practice for each child.
Exactly. And when you have 6 different children on 6 different levels, that is not an easy
Hmm.
task.
To make it challenging for their learning differences. Just that, different developmental levels.
Excellent. Excellent. The point being that it is not an easy task when you have a mixed age group to address all their different developmental levels and all the developmental areas, the 10 we just looked at. So it is not easy. Hopefully this webinar will help make it a little bit easier because I have a feeling that you're already doing a lot of the things we're going to talk about, but you maybe never realize how much you really are doing. But when you're planning, here are some things that we must consider. And we just talked a lot about each child's developmental level. And then someone, when we talked about the gifted exception there, adaptations needed for special needs, which can be gifted. It can be even something like a language delay. It could be a fine motor issue. ELL, DLL, they're dual language learners or English language learners. The materials you need to do the experience, the space. Is this going to be an indoor, an outdoor, a table, a floor? Thinking about where the experience is going to take place. Is the experience going to be teacher directed or child led or adult directed, child led? What is your role, basically, is what you're thinking about there. And then the developmental areas and the skills addressed, just like we talked about with the 10 developmental areas. Um, when we use those 10 developmental areas, there's actually 40 skills that connect to those 10 areas. So we take it down a step further. So when you're doing your formal assessment, obviously, that's what you'd be looking at, is those skills. So all those things, all 6 of those things you need to think about when you're doing each experience, which, as someone said, there's not enough time in the day, right? That all takes a lot of time, but it is time well spent. So we're going to do some practicing right now. And because pumpkin time is coming up and everybody loves pumpkins, we're going to talk about pumpkins. And we're going to work on thinking about all 6 of those different things that you must think about when you're planning experiences. So, as an example, we're doing pumpkin printing. I'm sure you've all seen those little mini pumpkins. They're more gourds than pumpkins that they sell at the grocery store this time of year. That's what I'm talking about, not obviously a big pumpkin. But we're going to gear this again, toddlers or school age. And the goal for me is creative arts. I've thought about the different developmental levels or different developmental areas, excuse me, creative arts, logic and reasoning, fine motor skills, gross motor skills, we'll talk about that, science knowledge, social and emotional, math knowledge, and language. Okay, so those are the developmental areas we're going to address, or my goal for this experience will be to address those 7 areas. What am I going to need? I'm going to need my pumpkins, I'm going to need large sheets of paper, and I'm going to need orange paint soaked sponges or folded paper towels in shallow dishes. In other words, we're going to press and paint. What skills are the children going to need in order to do this experience? Well, they're going to need to be able to hold the pumpkin and press it in the paint and then on their paper. They're going to need to have some patience and persistence, because that might not be an easy task for those children who are just developing fine motor control, or may have an area of weakness that they're working on where they need to reinforce fine motor skills. Problem solving. How am I going to do this? They have to be able to problem solve. Paint covered fingers are a big possibility in this experience, and I'm sure some of you out there have children with sensory issues who do not like getting their hands dirty. So how are you going to handle that? Sharing materials. So if you only have a few pumpkins, you don't have enough pumpkins for everybody to have their own pumpkin, how are you going to handle the sharing? How will they handle sharing? You probably have children that are very good at sharing materials, and then you have others that are not. And it's developmentally appropriate for a toddler not to want to share, or a 2-year-old. Mine, they're not going to want to give that pumpkin up once you hand it to them. So just keeping that in mind. And language, engaging with you and the other children, asking for help if they need it. Those are all the skills that are going to be necessary for this activity that I have listed out. But there's probably others. Can you think of any other skills that are going to be required to do pumpkin printing? And if you can, share them in the question box.
Take just a minute. We've had a couple of other comments that came in after you finished, but I think we got the most of it covered. Okay, gross and fine motor skills for this activity,
Mhm.
especially if it's a large pumpkin. Helping with the glue. So I guess that would be under sharing and
Yes,
uh,
and fine motor probably.
yeah. I wish these boxes were bigger. They're very, very. Okay. Let's take your time. If you can think of other skill sets. Learning where pumpkins come from, seeds and growing. There we go. Following direction, language, social studies. Assistance with the soak sponges.
Hmm.
Having having enough for everyone so that they don't get upset. Still a need to share, but keeping everyone engaged. How to help toddlers paint pumpkins with small paintbrushes. You can make the oh, that's something for me. um, Math patterning, etc. Math patterning, counting. Being able to focus and just kind of focus on the activity.
Right,
They're all
exactly.
good.
Exactly. All right, great. So the other things that you must think about when you're planning, besides the developmental areas, besides the materials, besides the skills that are going to be needed and where the children are on the continuum of those skills, is where, how, and when. Okay. So where are you going to do this experience? What are the steps that you're going to do? What adaptations are you going to need for different developmental levels? And when is the experience going to occur? And I know it's a lot to think about each experience that you're doing, but trust me when I say that if you put the thought in on the front end, it will pay you back on the back end. Because if you've thought about the developmental areas, if you've thought about the adaptations, if you've thought about all these things, then as you're doing your formal assessment or your observations, your anecdotal notes, you know exactly what you're looking for, and you can make sure that you're recording the data that you need on each child as you plan your experiences. So with that said, here's what I had for my pumpkin printing: where, how, and when. So my idea is that the children are going to be taking these small pumpkins like the gourds that we saw, and they're going to be picking them up with their hands, pressing them into a paint-soaked sponge or paper towels, and then pressing them on paper. Okay, so that's going to be the general experience of pumpkin printing. We're going to do it indoors at the art table or the table if you don't have an art table. If you're using your kitchen table, which most of you probably are, the table. And we're going to do it during morning free play choice or free choice play. That would be a time when you could set this experience up as one the children could choose, but they might choose to be doing other things like with the blocks or maybe in dramatic play or whatever the other activities you have set up. So the how is what you're going to do. Well, you're going to set out the materials. And like I said, they're going to press the bottoms, the sides, the tops, whatever they want into the paint and on the paper. This is an open-ended experience. Will everyone's project at the end look the same? Absolutely not. Some children may choose to roll the pumpkin in the paint and then roll it all over their paper. Others may choose to press it in the paint and then press it on the paper. Some may choose to use it in an entirely different way that you haven't even thought of. And that's great. You want it to be open-ended. Um, your role, or as I'm proposing the role of you as the adult, is not to lead and direct it and tell them what to do with the pumpkins. Your role is to ask questions, talk about what you see, engage them in conversations, ask open-ended questions, and there's some of that here in the broken out for different developmental levels. Um, so with toddlers and twos and others with limited fine motor control, you could adapt the pumpkins by wrapping paper towels around the stems and taping them, which will make like a handle and make them easier to hold on to. Um, you also, with this group, developmentally, if they are toddlers and twos, they're working on language. They're probably not very verbal yet, but they're absorbing everything you say. So you're going to want to describe what they're doing. You're going to describe what happens when. If you have ELL or DLL children and you speak two languages, you want to incorporate some of their home language and English at the same time, so they're learning. Um, with your developmental levels of threes, fours, and advanced preschoolers, and even school age children, they can explore different ways to make prints with the pumpkins. They might decide to paint on the pumpkins, wrap the paper around them, and create a print that way. You'll also want this group to predict what they think is going to see, or what they're going to see, or what's going to happen when they press the pumpkin in the paint and then they press it on the paper. Making predictions is really powerful because it's challenging children to think about what's going to happen or what they think is going to happen. Then they can compare that to the actual results. Um, so everybody in your mixed age group is doing pumpkin printing, but they're not all doing it the same way. And your expectation level is based on where they are developmentally. So if you were doing this activity, I want you to think about the children in your group right now, the children you have. And I want you to think about which way would work best with each child in your group. And then if there's a way that you think might work better than what I have right here, obviously you would want to incorporate that as well. But the point being, you can do one activity, pumpkin printing, and you can adapt it for different developmental levels. It just takes a little bit of thought on your end, on the front end, to be prepared. And you have to know where each child is developmentally. Because again, you might have a 3-year-old who has stellar fine motor control and can do all kinds of things with painting pumpkins and rolling them in paper. And then you may have a 3-year-old who is just barely able to hold a paintbrush. And so they may benefit from having their stem on their pumpkin wrapped with paper towel so they have a thicker handle. Again, you really just need to know. Same thing with engaging them in conversations. You're going to know which children are more verbal and which are not yet able to converse back and forth. But that's okay. You can still describe their actions. You can just still describe the results. And they will also learn as you engage in conversations back and forth with your more verbal children. That's a powerful way for them to learn language. Um, so the point of all of this is that you can take one activity like pumpkin printing and you can do it with your entire mixed age group, just with a little bit of thought. So with that said, let's talk about the developmental areas that would be addressed if you did this experience with your children. So we have 7 areas that we're going to address with the children that are engaging in pumpkin printing if they choose this experience. Language development. Okay, receptive is for those toddlers, twos, nonverbals, who you're describing what they're doing, you're describing the materials, and they're absorbing language. That's receptive, right? Expressive is for those children who you can engage in back and forth conversations. What do you think is going to happen when you press your pumpkin on your paper? What do you think you're going to see? Were your predictions correct? What do you think is going to happen when it looks like you're painting the pumpkin on the outside. What do you think is going to happen when you put it on your paper now? Back and forth, right? And vocabulary. Where do you think the pumpkins came from? Someone talked about that. How do pumpkins grow? You can incorporate all that science knowledge into this experience as well as making predictions and using their senses. How does the paint smell? How does the paint feel? Um, all of those things can be incorporated. Math knowledge, comparing and contrasting. What happens when you press the top of the pumpkin in the paper? What happens when you press the bottom in? How are the pumpkins the same? How are the pumpkins different? You can talk about colors, even patterns, depending on how they make, what they do with the pumpkins. Social and emotional, someone talked about sharing the pumpkins. If you know your group is not going to have a good time, if you don't have enough pumpkins for everybody, then you probably just need to have a pumpkin for everybody. It is, again, totally developmentally appropriate for a toddler or 2 and even some 3s not to want to share. Heck, there's I can think of teenagers that don't want to share. So that's not abnormal. And you know your children better than anybody. So if it's going to make the activity more robust and more immersive, if everybody has their own pumpkin, then absolutely that's a great thing to do. Self-regulation. We don't throw the pumpkins, right? The paint stays on the table, it stays on the paper. Um, we use kind words. All those things can be part of this experience. It's obviously a creative art experience, fine motor skills. They have to be able to pick the pumpkin up. They have to be able to press the pumpkin down. And even taking care of themselves after you're done painting, what do you have to do? You have to clean up and you have to wash your hands. All right. And logic and reasoning, problem solving. How in the world do you use a pumpkin to paint? And how is using a pumpkin to paint different than using a paintbrush to paint? Okay, so what I'm showing you here is that one simple activity can not only address all the different levels that you have, but also multiple developmental areas. So when you're talking about addressing those skills that are on your assessments that you need to do, and you're talking about doing your anecdotal notes and your observations, this one experience will allow you to observe 7 different areas. And if we thought about it, we probably could maybe even add some more in there. Does that make sense? Any feedback so far?
Couple of feedbacks. There was a question, any suggestions around this activity for infants? And before we could even respond, someone had sent a suggestion for infants that you could get
Excellent.
different, yeah, it was so ironic. You could, for infants, you could get different textured gourds and let them explore them and describe the color, shapes, and textures with the infants because again, like Beth said, they're little sponges, and that language is so important for them to use. Um,
And if you wanted to paint with an infant, a way to do that that's a little less messy than just this would be put them in their high chair if they're able to sit. Okay, I'm making that assumption. I'm not talking about an infant that's obviously not even not even sitting up yet. And put a baking tray, a baking pan, like a 13 by 9 pan, on their tray table. Put the pumpkin in. Put a piece of paper in the bottom, dip the pumpkin in just a little bit of paint, doesn't have to be a lot, and then put the pumpkin in the pan and let them play around with the pumpkin, the paint, and then the paper and the paint and everything is in the pan, and it makes the cleanup a lot easier. You don't obviously have to make sure they don't decide to throw it, because I don't know about your infants, but when my children were younger, that was one of their favorite things to do, was throw things off of their tray tables.
that question was just on the table. How can we do any type of art with infants or young toddlers? So that was a good explanation, Beth. That timing was pretty good. Um, yes, perfect sense. You could use it with infants, and you just have to be just more careful.
Yep.
Um, works great with shallow boxes too.
Yes, it would, like a box lid or a shoe box, something like that. Yeah, or actually, it had to be a little bit bigger shoe box, like maybe one that bigger sneakers or boots came in. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So we keep thinking about the school age children, but we also get many questions about infants and how to do activities with infants. So all of those, no more comments yet, but
Okay. So what one of the handouts is that's and we're going to look at this in a little more detail in just a second. But one of the handouts is a lesson planning form. And this has all the things you need to think about when you're planning your experiences, what you're going to call it, especially for those of you who need to post a plan for parents, what materials you're going to need and where you're going to do it, what the steps are going to be, what developmental areas you're going to address, and what adaptations for your different developmental levels. Now, in your developmental areas, if you wanted to, you could use those picture codes that we use um, to make it easier to fit it in the space. But we're going to go to this form actually on our website because it's also posted there. But I want to go to the back side of it. I don't have that in the PowerPoint, and just show the example. So I want to pause right there before we leave this PowerPoint part of the presentation of the webinar, because I am going to go to our website and go to that form. But are there any questions so far that I can answer before we do that?
whoops, there is one comment. You can use a little bit of colored icing for infants that can sit in that tray.
That's true. If they're allowed
Yeah.
to have food, I mean, sugary sweets, yummy, yes.
So just as Beth leaves this PowerPoint, just realize that that is one of the handouts, or it's one of the downloads that you can use. But it's also, this PowerPoint is on our website under the support tab for webinars. So
Okay,
don't
I'm
worry
going to
about it.
leave this right now. Give me 1
There's,
second.
there's a good question right here. What kind of paint can you use for infants? And I'm sure that's so that you are making, because they're going to put it in their mouth because they put
Uh,
everything in their mouth.
I'm going to let those of you out there on this webinar answer that question. My children are now 19 and 20, almost 22. So there may be something new on the market that I don't know about. Anyone have any ideas or thoughts they would like to share on that?
take just a few minutes so people can type in. Maybe they found some product that is very appropriate. It silence is deadly. So it's so weird when we're all quiet. And I know you guys have been so patient because all you can do is type and you can't. You just have to listen. I'm so sorry.
I know for
Okay,
the, go
go
ahead.
ahead. This person responded that they use different types of vegetable juice, actually. Anything non-toxic, biocolor maybe, you would still want to monitor them, of course. Cool Whip with food coloring, fruit
That
juices
sounds good.
again. We can also place paint in some large baggies with paint and paper so that they're kind of squishing it.
That's a good idea.
Colored cool Whip. So seems to be a winner. Cool Whip, Cool Whip. We have lots of responses for that. All right, that's great. Thank you.
All right, so what I've done now is I've left the PowerPoint, like Sherry says, that is a handout. The slides are all there, and I'll show you where it is also going to be on our website. But I'm now on our website because I know we do have a lot of people out there who are not familiar with who we are, gwizeducation.com. We're a company that was founded in 2012, and we create a digital curriculum, meaning that everything we do lives on our website. We don't pack or ship anything. You decide what to print, you decide how much to print. And where I'm going to go right now is I'm going under our training and support tab to webinar training. That is also where you're going to be going once this is over to access the post-assessment that you will need to complete in order to get the certificate of attendance, but I'm not going to cover that right now. What I want to go to is the lesson planning form, and I want to open that up. So you all have this as a handout, and if you can't download it for some reason or you don't have time to do that right now, again, it's right here on our website. But I want to go to the second page of this because what I've done is I've filled it out as a sample. And my experience that I planned was called painting with kitchen tools. And we're going to do this in the art area. I'm going to use kitchen tools like slotted spoons, spatulas, pancake turners, whisks. Again, I'm going to use the paint soaked sponges and white paper. It walks you through, again, the steps. It gives you the developmental areas that we're going to address. We're going to do our adaptations and things to remember at the bottom. So as you're planning all of this, other things to think in the back of your head are, can this experience be done indoors, outdoors, or both? Can you paint with kitchen tools outdoors? Absolutely, if the weather is nice. So you could really do this experience either place. What safety concerns must I remember when choosing materials? With this one, obviously, there's not a lot of things to consider unless, like you said, there were children who are going to eat the paint or maybe use a pancake turner as a weapon. Then you might have to think about safety. Um, how can I build in self-help skills? How can I address special needs in ELL, DLL? How many developmental areas can I address? And I've filled that out up here. What specific skills could I observe for each child's formal assessment? So you can look at the formal assessment, look at the different developmental areas, and then look at the skills related to those and connect the dots. Could I take photos, videos, or collect a work sample for each child's portfolio? And what's your role going to be? That's a really important question. Are you going to be leading it? Are you going to be supporting it? Or are you simply going to be an observer? And that's an important thing to think about as you plan all your activities with children. All of the questions here truly could be asked of any experience that you plan. You really need to think about all these different questions when you're planning experiences, which again may seem like a lot, but in the end, it really does come back to pay you back because you know exactly when you're planning an experience what developmental areas you're going to address, which then links you to what skills you can observe, which then links you back to the formal assessment of each child. All right, so again, this is right here. I'm going to get back out of it. I went to our webinar training page. Here's the PowerPoint handout. This is where you're going to go to the assessment, but it is not active. So if you clicked it right now, it would say, sorry, not taking any responses because it won't be active until after we end. And there's the lesson planning form. Okay. So what I'm going to do now Well, I'll pause and see if there are any questions first, and then I'll say what I'm going to do next. Any questions on any of that so far? Any questions on the lesson planning form?
No questions yet.
Okay. All right. So what I've done is I've logged in as a customer because I want to go to one of our teaching guides because we're going to practice some of what we have learned. So I'm going under the member portal to the units that we currently have available. And for those of you, again, who are not familiar, we do 2 units every month and we post them for 45 days. Once the 45 days is over, they come down. So right now we actually have 4 different units. If I scrolled down, you would see Super Senses and Taking Care of Me, which were our September units. We do not date anything. So you really could do, Super Senses any time of year. But I'm going to go into our second unit for October, which is called Kitchen Caboodle. And this unit is all about things that happen in the kitchen. It's about refrigeration and foods that have to go in the freezer and how food is packaged. Some's packaged in boxes and some's packaged in cans and some in cartons. So this unit is really and all about the tools you use in the kitchen, and it's a great unit for also incorporating safety because there are a lot of issues related to safety and you can never reinforce those enough related to the kitchen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, and each one of our units comes with all these different materials, which I'm not going to go into, but just to know that there's more than just a teaching guide. I want you to see that there's a whole list of things, but I'm going to go into the teaching guide for Kitchen Caboodle. So let me scroll here just down a little bit. We go through just an introduction, but I'm actually I have a special day picked out that we're going to go to. Just bear with me because I have to, my toolbar gets hidden behind the GoToWebinar bar and then I can't see it. So just bear with me a second. I'm going to day 5. Again, we don't date it. So there's 10 days of activities and lesson plans in each unit, just so you know. And I'm going to go to day 5. Okay, day 5, our focus is going to be on baking and roasting in the oven. And no, we are not going to read Hansel and Gretel because I find that a very violent fairy tale. But anyway, when we do our lesson plans, what we do is we put a cumulative list of the developmental areas that you would address if you do all the experiences for the day. So if you did all the experiences that we planned for this day, you would cover social and emotional, language, physical development and health, approaches to learning, logic and reasoning, creative arts, literacy, and science knowledge. But I'm going to scroll down here to our exploring together. You'll notice that we also have ways that we reinforce language, and we have a whole webinar all about GWiz, but that's not what we're going to focus on right now. So our exploring together, think of it as like your group time / circle time. We just call it exploring together because it's a very hands-on experience for us. It's not just you talking, but more engaging with the children and exploring together, hence why we call it that. For this experience, we are going to address approaches to learning, physical development, social development, science knowledge, logic and reasoning, literacy, social studies, creative arts, and language. And the materials we're going to need are going to be our puppet. We have a folded paper puppet, cookbooks that contain photos of food or magazine with pictures of food, baking clay, which we prepared ahead of time, and our baking tray and aluminum foil. And the whole point of this experience is to talk about the oven. As adults, we totally know what happens in an oven and why there's an oven in a kitchen and what you use it for. But for children, that could be totally new knowledge. And so during this experience, we're going to use our puppet to talk about things that you make in the oven and talk about what families make in the oven. And it's a perfect time to incorporate diversity because different families eat different foods that are prepared in an oven. And then at the end, we're going to give each child a small amount of baking clay, and they're going to make something which we're then going to put in the oven. And we're going to talk about, before we put them in there with children who are more verbal, we're going to write down their predictions, and we're going to note letters, letter sounds, and words while we're doing it. Then we're going to bake them, and then once they're baked, we're going to compare what happened to their items when they were put in the oven, and did they change as they were predicted. So what I've done here and what we've done is we've thought about the different areas, right? Developmental areas, the materials. This is going to take place obviously in whatever that area is where we gather for our group time, but then we're going to need to move to a table to work with our baking clay. Um, we're going to talk about within the activity, challenge more verbal children to share. So we're adapting for different developmental levels there. And we're going to ask a lot of open-ended questions, which is going to really get the conversation going. And those children who are not as expressive will learn from those who are. Okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about if you were going to do this experience with your children. Okay. And one of the things that we need to think about is obviously developmental levels, right? So let's just focus on the part at the end where they're using the baking clay. How could you adapt that for different developmental levels in your group? Maybe you have different children in different areas of development related to fine motor control or persistence, patience. How could you adapt that part if you're doing this as a group experience and you want to incorporate everybody? How could you adapt it, and or how can you keep your expectations level developmentally appropriate? In other words, if somebody is only there for a minute or 2 minutes, is that okay with you? And if they go off and do something else while the other children are working with the baking clay, is that going to be something that will happen with your group, or is there a way that maybe you could get them to enjoy the baking clay too? So those are all things you have to think about. Sometimes it's okay. I mean, in most cases, it is perfectly fine if a child chooses not to engage during group time. But you do have to have a plan, especially if you're the only person, of what they're allowed to go to or where they're allowed to be. Obviously, they can't go outside and play by themselves. That's not appropriate. So think about how you could adapt this experience for different developmental levels in your group and give us some ideas.
Take your time. It's funny, everything comes in all at once. But I did have a suggestion from an attendee that told me how to make this box bigger so it's easier for me to read the responses. I'm so
Hooray!
I know. I know. Why I had not tried that. Right. So we've already had the question about the certificate, and I've posted under the chat box under the question for everybody to see. There will be an email that goes out an hour after this with the link. Okay, I work with infants, and I guess I would give the child a certain shaped toy and let them put shapes in the clay. Yeah. Perhaps put the baking clay into a sandwich bag for my 14-month-old so they aren't tempted to eat it.
That's a very good idea. And they could
Uh,
still manipulate it, and that they would build fine motor control, and you wouldn't have to worry about them putting it in their mouth.
for the older children, have them make something with detail, perhaps something that they have been learning about.
Sure.
Um, School age may want to create pots, decorative things to paint, and they would have more creative ideas for the clay. Prepare for all the children, talk about the clay, and then let them know that they can use it as Play-Doh. With Play-Doh, you can get them interested in exploring the clay.
That's true. And they may not be familiar with baking clay if they've never worked with it before.
Mhm.
And you don't usually put Play-Doh in the oven. In fact, I'm
No,
not sure what would happen if you did.
yeah. Um, oh, we got so far. There's so many different medias now instead of the Play-Doh, but the baking clay is something a little bit different that you do need to kind of,
Yeah,
well, all of it you need to kind of supervise pretty close if they don't
exactly.
need it.
All right, well, we're going to practice again. So let's move on to,
One last comment.
go ahead, one.
We use small rolling pins and cookie cutters in many shapes and let them color in the dough in their choice of color. Great. Just wanted to
That's
add,
excellent.
yeah.
The
Okay.
more ideas, the better. The more ideas, the better. So, when in continuing on talking about when doing this lesson planning, and these are the things that we think about when we write these lesson plans, were those basic questions of who, what, where, why, when, how, right? So here's an experience called "Catch It in Your Pan," and we're going to use baking pans, but we're using them in a totally different way to catch bubbles. All right. So again, when you look at this experience, you're going to see this one has a sunshine, which means it's an activity that you're going to be doing outside. Sometimes when we do that, when we put the sunshine, it means it could be done outside, but in this case, it means it probably should be done outside. You could do bubbles in the house, but it would be much better to do it outdoors. Um, I've thought about the different developmental levels or different areas, excuse me, social and emotional, physical, logic and reasoning, math, approaches to learning, science, and language. So how are they going to do all those things in this experience? Well, social and emotional, there's a lot of self-regulation going to be involved of personal space, engaging with others, physical development, obviously fine motor and holding the pan and coordination, but also gross motor because you're going to be running around trying to catch the bubbles in your pan. Logic and reasoning, problem solving, and using a common item, in this case, a cake pan or a pie pan, to catch a bubble. Math, you can talk about the shapes of the bubbles. There's spheres. Approaches to learning would be trying new things, persistence and patience. It might take a while to catch a bubble in that pan, and cooperation. And again, personal space. Science, sensory, the bubbles smell, you can touch the bubbles, they pop in the pan. There are also predictions, what do you think is going to happen when you catch the bubble in your pan for those who are more verbal. And then, of course, just about the natural world. What happens to the bubbles? Why does the wind make them blow in different directions? Why are they going up high and not coming down low? All those questions. And of course, language. Um, Thought about materials, what I'm going to need to do this experience, and then here is the how it's going to happen. So what we're going to do is look at the two different ways of doing this, because obviously, again, you're going to have different developmental levels in terms of gross motor skills, fine motor skills, self-regulation, cooperation, and again, language. So you can read for yourself the different adaptations of how to do this experience. And then we also are going to take it a step further with your more advanced children, again, getting them to predict, is it easier to catch the bubbles in certain kinds of pans? Why do they think that is? Talk about the sphere shape. So again, one activity, but many different developmental levels. So with this one, I want you to think about the children in your group right now. And I want you to read the different opportunities or adaptations down there for the different developmental levels. And when we say toddlers, twos, threes, we're not talking about their chronological age. We're talking about developmentally where they are. So I want you to think about your children. And I want you to think about which children would do best with the different options, and give us an example of a child, you don't have to say their name, but a child in your group, and which way you think would be best for them and why. So for instance, maybe I have a child in my group named Jamie, and Jamie, I think, would really do well with the second option, because Jamie, even though Jamie is 3, he is very coordinated and also very verbal. Okay, so give us an example of a child in your group and which way you think of those options would work best for them, but most importantly, why it would work best for them.
Okay. Take a few minutes.
I know it's getting late and that's a hard question,
I
but
know.
it's an important question.
Really makes you think about your children and what's best for them. Coming in at just a little bit slower than the first hour responses. So Nothing yet.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah,
maybe they all fell asleep.
I know. I know you're still there. I can see that, but um, oh,
Uh,
okay. It would work best for toddlers, twos, and threes because they're going to focus on doing the task versus being in competition with others, like some of the older kids would be. My children are all school age. I still think they would enjoy bubbles. Most of them do. Younger children enjoy the sensory.
that is true.
Mm, yes,
The with the school age children, they could also be your bubble blowers.
yes,
Um, put
or
them to work. Hmm.
counters, or
Yep, absolutely. And that's something that, definitely they could do if you have children that are tend to be competitive against each other, have them compete against themselves. For instance, you blow the bubbles and they see how many they can catch before all the bubbles are gone, and they can compete to see if they can catch more bubbles the next time. It probably would mean that you'd have to divide them up, and especially with COVID, where you want to keep some space, you could easily do that and just blow a set of bubbles for each child. So, okay, these are your bubbles. You see how many you can catch, and these are your bubbles. You see how many you can catch. But that would be a way for them to, they naturally want to be competitive. And in today's world, unfortunately, I think there's way too much competition for young children, but that's a way for them to compete against themselves.
um, my toddler. Let's see, one second. Okay, so it didn't put the name, but their child has just turned 3, is third and last in the family, and acts as the baby. So hands are fabulous, even though he has an extensive vocabulary, I believe is what she said. He speaks at a very slow pace,
Hmm.
but I would put him with the TT group. My youngest was 6 years younger than his next brother, and he didn't speak for the longest time, but there was nothing wrong. He just didn't have to because he was the youngest and the baby. My toddler, I believe, would do better with catching them with his hands than chasing them.
Hmm.
My younger kiddos would follow the older kiddos, and I found that my older kiddos would help the younger kiddos.
That's wonderful.
Mhm. There's um, there's a lot of fun stuff for any child to learn. I have a 1-year-old, but he would do better with the first option because he doesn't quite have the coordination to hold a pan and run at the same time. But he
Exactly.
loves popping bubbles.
And that's great that you know that. That's the whole point, right? You know where he is. And you never want to give a child a task to do that is just way beyond what is developmentally appropriate for them. You don't want it to be too easy, but you don't want it to be way too hard either. That just sets up the stage for frustration, and that's not a happy day for anybody.
I work with school age, so graphing the numbers they catch each time um, when they blow the bubbles.
That's a great idea. Absolutely.
I have toddlers and they love to run and jump, so catching bubbles would just be perfect. Taking turns. Perfect for all ages. Okay. All those are good suggestions.
Excellent. All right, so now let's look at cookie cutter art. Now this one you'll notice we only have an adaptation for advanced preschoolers, but basically what we're doing here is, cookies are something that you bake in the oven, and cookie cutters are excellent because they come in so many different shapes and sizes. You can use so many different colors of paint. They're wonderful for fine motor control. Um, but what I want you to think about is here, this is an open-ended experience where you're going to sit out the paint, you're going to sit out the paper, the cookie cutters, and the children are going to just do their own thing. So I want you again to consider the children in your group, and I want you to think about as you read through there how it's planned out and how you might need to adapt for a child in your group. Maybe it's a child that has a special need, maybe it's a child that is just not able to do it the way it's written. How would you adapt it and why would you adapt it? Same thing we just did on the other side, but in this case, I have not given you any toddler to young 3 or just toddler 2 adaptation. Um, and the main reason is because those children will naturally figure out how to do it their own way. But think about your children and how you might need to adapt it so you could do cookie cutter art with everybody. Just think about it that way. I want to do cookie cutter art, and I have all these different developmental levels, and I want to be able to do this with everybody, and I want everybody to take something away from it, and I want everybody to learn something from it. So let's say you work with school age children. How could they still do cookie cutter art? How could you make this into an experience that they would enjoy? Or maybe you have toddlers. How could you adapt it that way? And share your ideas in the question box.
Beth, I've had a request if you'll move the page up a little bit so that they can read the rest
Oh,
of the copy about
sorry.
with the
There you go.
input. Here's okay. Um,
We're not doing the purple box yet. Just stay over here in this pink box.
okay. So there's still some other comments from the
Sure,
past
go ahead.
experience. I had an autistic child, and as he just loved to pop bubbles, so I made a game for the older children. The let's see how many bubbles that he could, so he could just get them, so he could pop them.
Oh, fun, fun. And again,
When
you
I
know your child, right? I mean, you know your children. That's what's most important.
when I had 1 year olds, I had them pop bubbles with different parts of their body instead of just trying to catch the bubbles in a container, so that they were learning body. It's late, isn't it? Body parts as well.
That's a great idea. Pop them with your hand, stomp them with your foot, your head.
Okay. Give that child a simple task to keep an extra eye on them to make sure that they feel included. See, I'm thinking they're referring to the
Mhm.
autistic. Okay. I would also let them make the Play-Doh. School-age children would enjoy cookie cutter art, knowing that this may be a gift for mom or grandmother.
It makes really cool wrapping paper too.
Instead of using cookie cutters for my toddlers, I use shape sorters, and for the older toddlers, they can identify the shapes.
Excellent. And I'm assuming you're talking
So,
about like the plastic shape
yeah,
shorts. Now I can't talk. Shape sorter that you put it in the little holes.
yeah, all of those are good. So that's all we've got so far.
Well, that's
That's good.
I mean, and this is the whole point, right? Is the point of this whole webinar was to think about there's so many different aspects to your day instead of just what am I going to do today? What developmental areas am I going to address? What developmental levels am I going to address? Where am I going to do the experience? How am I going to do the experience? What do I need to adapt? What materials do I need? Where am I going to do the activity? There's a lot of thought that goes into planning activities and experiences for children that cover multiple developmental areas, which then in turn helps you out because again, if you're covering those developmental areas and you're doing your observations, anecdotal notes, or working on your formal assessment, you know what you're looking for. You know what you're covering. It also helps you identify, as someone mentioned really early in the webinar, red flags, an area that a child may not be progressing as predicted and may need more reinforcement, or as someone mentioned, a child that is very gifted and may need more challenging adaptations to really get them immersed in learning. So the point being, and that's the whole point of this webinar, is to think about those questions as you're planning your activities and whether you're using the planning sheet that we've included with this webinar or one you already use, just to keep all those questions in mind. Um, and when I said at the very beginning, it's like our secret sauce, it's what we do at GWiz, right? We start with the idea of a unit, we web out the unit, we take the unit and break it into focuses for each day. And then as you're seeing here, then we break it into experiences and adaptions for different developmental levels. We've even taken it so far, and I don't know if I have one right here, but we've even, starting this fall, there's one, we've added COVID adaptations in blue. So you have some ideas of how to, you know, with materials particularly, limit and or be able to clean slash sanitize after use. Again, the 6-foot social distancing, all those kind of things. We also added in, because we are digital and we can do that, we added in a booklet of school age experiences in addition to the ones that are in the lesson plan. So like our lesson plan book that you're looking at right now has 10 days of activities. It also has 6 school age experiences, but we added an entirely additional 8 experiences because a lot of providers have children all day now because of remote online schooling. So the point being that when you're planning your lessons, that's kind of the thought process we go through when we do ours, because our goal is to cover as many developmental areas consistently over the course of a unit and address as many different developmental levels as we possibly can. And then we even have a piece we call connecting the dots that takes it a step further, that details for each skill, all 40 skills that connect to the 10 developmental areas, what activities address that skill, so you can link it to your formal assessment. So there's a lot of thought that goes into lesson planning, especially for a mixed age group. And we know it's a monumental task, and we wanted to provide you with some of the ideas that we use when we do our lesson planning, so that hopefully that will be beneficial to you as you do yours. So what I want to do right now is pause just for a second. If there are any, is there any questions or comments before we wrap it up for the evening, because it is almost 8:30, and I want to show you where you're going to go to then complete your post assessment and get your certificate. If you are in the PD registry for Pennsylvania, I will, sometime tomorrow, I will go in and start checking off. If you've done the post assessment, I will check off and give you credit in the registry. If for some reason you're on this webinar and you forgot to go into the PD registry to register for this event, send me an email at B as in boy Smith at gwizeducation.com. Let me know, give me your name, and I'll have to add you to the registration list. So that should not be a problem, but I just need to know who you are. Any questions, comments as we wrap it up for this evening?
Two comments I wanted to share. In New York, they cannot use, they cannot use more than one child's sensory or water bin. They must each have their own. That's probably for the COVID. That's an interesting thought. Every state's kind of dealing with it with
It
their
is.
own.
It is. It is. And that's one of the adaptations we didn't do for water play, but we did do for Play-Doh, was to, if you're going to use Play-Doh, have each child have their own container of Play-Doh labeled with their name.
There's one other question, and this person must be with the CCR&R, that some of the family daycare homes do not have access to the internet. They're asking if there's any book options available, and we don't have that right now. If they don't have access at their home, my suggestion would be that they could need to go to the library, just take that back, and download the files there, and then possibly print them out, or take the files and print them just wherever at Kinko's or something like that,
Yeah,
or at the library.
yeah, I will say we have and I don't know if Erica is on the webinar. She was going to be. She's with a group in California, and she actually has negotiated with a local printing shop to print out the teaching guide and all the materials for GWiz for her cohort. I don't know if it's at a very discounted rate or for free. But anyway, I do know we also have some in Florida, some of the ELCs down there that will actually print materials for the provider. So if you have questions about that, just reach out to me. Again, my direct email is B as in boy Smith at gwizeducation.com. You can also send a message to customer service at gwizeducation.com, but we can chat offline. Any other questions, comments?
Let's see. Yes. Okay. There's a question, what's the cost of the curriculum? If you go to the page where Beth is, our homepage, www.gwizeducation.com, we've got 3
Actually, it's not there, Sherry, because we moved it to the
That's right.
pricing page, which I can't get to right now because I'm logged in.
Well, there's a monthly, you can choose monthly, quarterly, or yearly. And if you go to our homepage, you can click
Give
on
me
how
one
to get
second.
started.
I'm going to log out and log back in so they can see what it looks like. I don't want to confuse anybody because I'm logged in. The reason we're talking about this is because there's a button that says sign up, and that button disappears whenever you're logged in. So let me just show you what it looks like when you go there without, aha, there you go. So there's a sign up button, and if you click on sign up and you scroll down, this is what Sherry was talking about. And we also have a discount code tonight that we're going to offer to those of you who are not customers if you'd like to try GWiz. It's $10 off your first month, quarter, or year. And just think of GWiz as like Netflix, right? It's a subscription and it will continue until you cancel, which you can do at any time. But the discount is $10 off monthly, yearly, or quarterly. And the code, if you have a pencil, is lesson, LESSON 2020. Sherry, does it matter
And
if it's capital or lowercase?
it should not. It's been entered as capital. I'm going to also type Beth's email because about 3 people have asked me for your email with the Pennsylvania registry, Beth.
Sure.
So I'm going to put it where
In the chat
everybody can
box?
see it. Yeah.
Okay,
And just send it to all bsmith at GWiz Education. And with that, I'm also going to send that code so that you can see it.
perfect. Perfect. But we decided to go with this digital model of providing the lesson plans. Like when I went into the lesson plan book a minute ago, right? You wouldn't have to print that out unless you wanted to print that out. You could view it on your computer. We have a lot of providers that view it on their tablets. The majority of our components are like that. Things you would want to print out are story props, obviously, or like the puppet. But even like our family letter, you know, you could just email it as an attachment to families and you wouldn't have to worry with printing it out. So we've tried to be very conscious of environmental issues, but also your budgets. I mean, when you're talking about printing and shipping things, it gets very expensive.
And I just sent you a comment. Erica is on the webinar tonight, and she said that whoever does the printing for, they do it free as part of their community support. That's great.
That's wonderful. Thanks,
Very,
Erica.
yeah. Somebody did some great sales work there to get them to do that. That's great.
All
But
right, so what I'm
um,
going to do now is I'm going to show you where you're going to go for the post assessment. So I am under, and as Sherry said, you are going to get an email after the webinar is over that will include the link to this. But if you want to do it before you get that email, this is where you're going to go. You're going to go to webinar training, which is under training and support. And you're just going to scroll right down. This is the webinar they're doing right now. Again, if you didn't get a chance to download the form, the lesson planning form or the PowerPoint, it's right here. Here's where you're going to click to go to the post assessment. But as you'll see, it's not taking any submissions yet. I have to go back out to log it in and tell it to accept those submissions. So once that happens, then it will be active and you can complete it. This is really important. So we know that a lot of you want a printed certificate of attendance. So what will happen is you're going to answer all the questions and don't panic. It's not long and it's not hard. You're going to click submit. Once you click submit, a message is going to pop up. And within that message is a URL for the certificate, which you're going to just block and copy, put it in your browser, and it should take you right to the PDF that you can print out. If you forget how to do that, do not panic. Send me an email, because I can go in and I can make sure that you did the post assessment, and then I can send the link to you. If you can't find it, it's fine. If you're in the PD registry, you must complete the post assessment for me to give you credit. So be sure you do that. So again, I'm under training and support, and I went to webinar training, and this is the link where you're going to click to go to the post assessment, or you can just wait for the email to come, and then you can click on the link in the email. All right. There are a lot of other recorded webinars that we have available. If you scroll down, I mentioned the math one. There's one called All About Gee Whiz. So if you want to subscribe and you're going to subscribe, or if you're a new customer, because I know we have a lot of customers on the line tonight too, that's an excellent one to watch because we go through all the components, what they are, how they're used in great detail. So if you scroll down on this page, you will see that. Any last minute questions, comments, concerns, anything I can answer before we wrap it up for the evening?
I do want to share with everyone, sometimes if I know Beth said there's a link as soon as you finish the post assessment. Do not worry about your score. No one's going to see it but you. So if
Correct.
you need to go in and take it again, um, do it. You know, that's okay. I'm going
Yes.
to repeat Beth's email again real quick. It's bsmith@gwizeducation.com. And you need to type out gwizeducation.com. Let's see. I think that about does it. So if you have questions after we close tonight, please just send them to either customer service at gwizeducation.com, or you should have my email because my email is how you got your invitation to come to the webinar, which is smayberry@gwizeducation.com. And I've given you Beth's. Please don't hesitate to send the questions. This recording should be posted by tomorrow afternoon sometime. It takes just a while. It should be shortly after lunch. We
It'll be right
definitely have to,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but again, thank you. I know it's a long night and you're probably very tired, but thank you all, everyone, for coming. And
Yes,
Beth?
and there will be a very, very, very short survey when we close out the webinar. It's
Oh,
just a
yeah.
few questions. If you could answer those questions, that would be really helpful to us. We are always looking for feedback and how to make things better. But if you found it helpful, that's always great for us to know as well. And you can always send feedback to me directly. You have my email, so that's fine too. And please, if you're not familiar with GWiz, take some time to dig around on our website. There are a lot of free resources for anybody, whether you're a customer or not, under this tab. Um, that's one of the things that's big about what we do is we want to support providers and quality specialists. There's a lot of free resources that you do not need to be a customer to access. So with that said, thank you so much for attending. Again, if you need anything, email me, and everybody have a great night.
Oh, one last comment. The survey is not the same thing as the post-assessment. That's
Nope.
two different dots. So the survey is just like 4 questions.
Yes,
Just
and just give me 5 minutes. I have to go out and log in and activate the post assessment. So I will do that as quickly as I can, but just give me a few minutes to be able to go out there and do that. And again, if you're in Pennsylvania, I will go out tomorrow morning and I will check to see who all has done the post assessment, and then I'll go in and check you off on the registry as completing the training. So don't panic if it doesn't happen right away.
all right. With that, I think that's it. Thank you,
I hope that
everyone, for coming.
I hope so. I'm tired. All right, we'll talk to everybody later. Thanks so much
Thanks.
for attending.
Bye.
Bye.